Hello, you're on the Mystery Trail channel. Today we will delve into the story of Detective Silas Riddle. At first glance, an ordinary case, but the dark corners of Dallas hide something creepy. Let's begin. They say Dallas is a city of opportunity, but I've only ever found it to be a city of shadows. The kind that stretch long over whiskey-soaked streets where men make promises they can't keep and women whisper secrets that can get a man killed. My name's Silas Riddle, and I make my living in those shadows. A private investigator, the kind people come to when the cops are either too busy or too crooked to care. It was late October, the autumn air thick with the smell of rain and something else, something I couldn't place. The city never slept, not really. The neon buzz of speakeasies hummed through the streets, and somewhere in the distance, a saxophone wept a lonely tune. That's when he walked in. The man was in his early 40s, dressed too fine for the part of town he'd wandered into. His suit was pressed, but his eyes were creased with worry. He hesitated at my office door, the words Riddle Investigations painted in gold on frosted glass before stepping inside. "You Silas Riddle?" His voice had the rasp of a man who had smoked too much and lived too little. That's what it says on the door. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "What can I do for you, Mr. Langley?" "Harold Langley." He swallowed hard. "My brother's missing." I didn't answer right away. People go missing in this town all the time. Some stay that way because they want to, others because someone else wants them to. "Missing how?" I asked. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "He went out 2 nights ago and never came home. No ransom note, no calls. Just vanished." I tapped the ash off my cigarette. "You talked to the police?" Langley scoffed. "They don't give a damn. Said men go missing every day in this city. That he probably ran off with a dame or got himself in trouble. But I know my brother. He wouldn't disappear without a word." I studied him a moment longer. "All right, Mr. Langley. I'll look into it. Where was he last seen?" Langley hesitated. "A speakeasy. The Velvet Viper." I raised a brow. The Velvet Viper wasn't just any speakeasy. It was a place where secrets traded hands like playing cards and where men disappeared more often than the booze. If Langley's brother had been last seen there, this was already more than just a simple missing person case. I grabbed my hat and stood. "Let's go take a look." As we stepped out into the fog-draped streets, I felt something shift in the air. A whisper of something just out of reach, something familiar and wrong. I shook it off. Maybe it was just the city breathing down my neck. Or maybe it was something worse. I had a feeling this case was going to drag up things best left buried, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face them. The Velvet Viper sat nestled between a pawn shop and a tailor's, its entrance hidden behind a rusted metal door that looked like it hadn't been used in years. A single dim bulb flickered above the threshold, barely illuminating the chipped brick walls. The kind of place where you either knew the password or you didn't get in. Langley hesitated, glancing around the street as if expecting someone to be watching. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice lower now. I rapped twice on the door, then paused before knocking once more. A small panel slid open, revealing a pair of sharp, suspicious eyes. "Who's a skin?" the doorman growled. "Silas Riddle. Here to wet my whistle." The panel shut with a click, then the door groaned open just enough for us to slip inside. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of gin. A jazz band played in the far corner. The music smooth but tinged with something restless, as if even the instruments knew trouble was brewing. I scanned the room. Booths lined the walls, their red velvet seats occupied by men in pinstripes and women in feathered headbands, whispering over glasses of bootleg liquor. And at the bar, tending to a line of customers with a practiced ease, was a woman I hadn't seen in years. Evelyn Monroe. She caught my eye and froze for just a second before slipping back in her role, pouring a drink as if she hadn't seen me at all. But I knew better. That look meant something, and whatever it was, it had trouble written all over it. Evelyn's presence complicated things. Last I'd seen her, she'd left town under circumstances neither of us cared to revisit. Now here she was, serving drinks in the same place Harold Langley had disappeared from. I made my way to the bar. Didn't expect to see you here, Evelyn. She poured another drink without looking up. Didn't expect to see you at all, Riddle. Langley shifted uncomfortably behind me. I leaned in, lowering my voice. A man went missing from here 2 nights ago. Harold Langley. Know anything about it? She hesitated, just long enough to tell me she did. Then she slid a glass across the counter.
Drinks on the house. Walk away, Silas.
But I never did know when to walk away. Before I could press further, a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. I turned to find myself face to face with a man I knew only by reputation, Gold-Tooth Tommy, one of the Viper's enforcers, and not a man known for his patience. You should listen to the lady, he said, voice smooth but laced with menace. Walk away. Langley tensed beside me, but I kept my expression calm. Wish I could, Tommy, but I've got a job to do. I didn't flinch. I've been threatened before. Hell, I've been shot at, roughed up, and left for dead more times than I could count. But there was something about Gold-Tooth's grin that set my nerves on edge. Langley, on the other hand, wasn't built for this. His face had gone pale, his hands trembling under the table. If I didn't handle this right, he'd crack like cheap glass. I leaned forward, tapping my cigarette into an empty glass. You deliver threats for a living? Or is this just a hobby? Gold-Tooth's grin widened. Let's just say I'm good at convincing people to mind their own business. Behind him, Evelyn was moving closer. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to say something. But then she thought better of it and disappeared behind the bar. I took a slow sip of my whiskey. Tell your boss I'm not in the habit of being scared off. Gold-Tooth's expression darkened. Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you. He straightened, adjusting his lapels before disappearing into the smoky haze of the club. I let out a slow breath and glanced toward Evelyn. Whatever she knew, she wasn't ready to spill it just yet, and that meant I had work to do. The night pressed in heavy as I stepped out of the Velvet Viper. The warning from Gold-Tooth lingered, but I've been in this business long enough to know that threats were often just noise. It was the quiet ones you had to watch out for. Langley trailed behind me, still pale. So what now? I pulled my collar up against the chill. Now we see if your brother left anything behind. We started with his apartment, a dimly lit place on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days. The door was locked, but locks weren't much of an obstacle. A quick twist of my tools, and we were inside. The place was ransacked, drawers yanked open, papers strewn across the floor. Someone had been here first, and they hadn't been looking for loose change. Then on the desk, I spotted it, a single torn page from a journal, with 3 haunting words scrawled across it. Evelyn knows why. Trouble indeed. I picked up the torn journal page, turning it over in my fingers. The handwriting was shaky, urgent. Whoever wrote this was either scared, dying, or both. Langley hovered over my shoulder. Evelyn? You think I think she knows more than she let on. That's when I saw it. Half buried beneath the mess. A pocket watch, its chain snapped, its cover smeared with something dark. And when I opened it, the hands were frozen at exactly midnight. The pocket watch lay heavy in my hand. Midnight, the exact time Harold Langley disappeared. Coincidence? I doubted it. Langley leaned in, his breath unsteady. What does it mean? I didn't have an answer, but I had a bad feeling. The watch wasn't just broken, it was deliberately stopped. Someone wanted to mark the time. Someone who knew what had happened that night. A creak in the hallway snapped me out of my thoughts. Langley tensed, his eyes darting toward the door. Someone was outside. I motioned for him to stay quiet and reached for my gun. The shadows under the door flickered as if someone was moving. Then a soft knock, 3 slow taps. I stood and cracked the door open just enough to see. A folded piece of paper was lying on the floor. I picked it up, but by the time I looked back into the hallway, it was empty. Whoever left it had vanished without a sound. Langley looked at me expectantly. I unfolded the note. 3 words were scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Leave it alone." My gut twisted. I glanced back at Langley, whose face had gone pale. He didn't have to say it. I knew what he was thinking. Someone was watching us. Someone didn't want us finding out the truth. I stuffed the note into my pocket and grabbed my coat. "We're leaving." Langley hesitated. "Where are we going?" I checked my gun and tucked it back into my holster. "To the one person who might have answers." His brow furrowed. "Who?" I pulled open the door and stepped into the night. Evelyn Monroe. The night air was thick with the scent of rain and gasoline as we drove through the dimly lit streets of Dallas. The road shimmered under the glow of the street lamps, and every shadow felt like a pair of watching eyes. Langley was fidgeting in the passenger seat. "You think she'll talk?" "She'll talk," I said, keeping my gaze on the road. "Whether she tells us the truth is another matter." The Velvet Viper was closed when we arrived, the alley behind it empty save for a couple of stray cats pawing at trash. I knocked on the back door, the sound echoing into the quiet. Minutes passed. Then a latch clicked, and the door opened just wide enough for a pair of familiar green eyes to glare at me. Evelyn Monroe didn't look pleased to see me.
You don't listen, do you, Silas?
I leaned against the doorframe. I'm a slow learner. She glanced at Langley, then back at me.
This isn't a good time.
Harold Langley disappeared at midnight 2 nights ago. A broken watch marked the time. Someone left me a note telling me to walk away. Tell me, Evelyn, is that just bad luck? Or am I stepping on someone's toes? Evelyn's jaw tightened.
You're in over your head.
Then why don't you pull me out? She hesitated, then stepped aside.
Come in. But you won't like what you find.
Evelyn led us into a dimly lit storeroom filled with crates of liquor and stacks of cigarette cartons. The air was thick with the scent of stale tobacco and spilled whiskey. She locked the door behind us, then turned, arms crossed, watching me with something between defiance and regret.
You shouldn't have come here, Silas.
Langley fidgeted beside me. If you know something about my brother, just tell us. Evelyn sighed and moved to a small wooden desk, pulling open a drawer. She produced a photograph and slid it across the table. I picked it up, the edges curling with age. It showed a group of men standing in front of a luxury car. Among them, Harold Langley, grinning like he'd just won the jackpot. "What am I looking at?" I asked. Evelyn hesitated.
That was taken 3 nights ago. Before he vanished.
Langley snatched the photo from my hands. "Who are these men?" She exhaled slowly.
People you don't want to be mixed up with.
I leaned in. Too late for that. "Who are they?" Evelyn met my gaze.
They call themselves the Black Veil. They run this city from the shadows, police, politicians, speakeasies, everything. If Harold got involved with them, he's either dead or worse.
Langley went pale. "What do you mean worse?" Evelyn hesitated again, then whispered.
There are things in this city, Silas. Things that don't make sense. People who disappear and don't stay dead.
The words sent a chill up my spine. I'd been expecting criminals, corruption, but this was something else. I slipped the photo into my pocket and straightened. "Where do we find them?" Evelyn shook her head.
You don't. They find you.
As if on cue, the lights flickered. A distant thud echoed from beyond the door. Evelyn's face tightened. "You need to leave. Now." Another thud. Closer this time. Langley stepped back, fear in his eyes. "Silas, what's happening?" I reached for my gun. "I don't know, but we're about to find out." The moment the second thud hit the door, I knew we were out of time. I drew my gun and motioned for Langley to stay behind me. Evelyn's face was unreadable, but she moved fast, pushing aside a stack of crates to reveal a narrow passageway behind the storeroom wall.
Go. Now.
Langley didn't need to be told twice. He bolted into the passage, and I followed, gun still in hand. Evelyn brought up the rear, sliding the false wall shut just as the storeroom door burst open with a crash. Heavy boots echoed against the wooden floorboards.
They know you're here.
She whispered, leading us down the dark corridor.
And they won't stop until they have what they want.
What do they want? I asked, my voice low. Evelyn didn't look back.
Harold Langley wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He took something from them. Something important.
Langley gasped. That's not possible. Harold wouldn't. Evelyn stopped suddenly and turned to face him.
Do you really know your brother as well as you think?
The weight of her words settled heavily between us. I glanced at Langley, whose expression was a mixture of shock and disbelief. But there was no time to argue. Behind us, muffled voices called out in the storeroom, followed by the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Evelyn grabbed my arm.
There's a service exit ahead. Get out of here before they find you.
I clenched my jaw. And what about you? She smirked.
I have my own ways of disappearing.
Before I could say another word, she turned and sprinted in the opposite direction, vanishing into the darkness. Langley and I pushed forward, emerging into a foggy back alley just as gunfire erupted behind us. Run! I barked, shoving Langley ahead. We tore down the alley, the sound of pursuit close behind. My mind raced as I tried to piece together the puzzle. The Black Veil wasn't just looking for Harold. They were looking for something he had. And if we didn't find it first, we might not live long enough to know why. The alley twisted like a snake, leading us deeper into the city's underbelly. My breath came in steady but quick bursts, my mind racing as I listened for our pursuers. The echoes of hurried footsteps behind us sent a cold wave through my spine. Langley struggled to keep up, his breath ragged. Where are we going? Somewhere they won't find us, I muttered, yanking him into a narrow side street. A neon sign flickered above a boarded-up tailor's shop, an old hideout of mine from years past. I kicked the door open, dragging Langley inside before slamming it shut behind us. The room smelled of dust and damp wood. I pressed my ear against the door, listening. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. A murmur of voices, then silence. Langley collapsed onto an overturned crate. This is insane. They're trying to kill us. I lit a cigarette and took a long drag, my hands steadier than I felt. No, they're trying to scare us. If they wanted us dead, we'd be lying in that alley right now. Langley wiped sweat from his forehead. So what now? I exhaled a slow plume of smoke. We need to find out what Harold stole. Evelyn said it was something important. If we can figure out what it is, we might have some leverage. Langley's face darkened. And if we can't, I flicked my cigarette to the floor and crushed it under my heel. Then we're dead men walking. A sudden knock at the back entrance made Langley jump. My gun was in my hand before I even registered the movement. A voice, a woman's, called through the door.
Open up, Riddle.
Evelyn. I hesitated only a second before unlocking the door. She slipped inside, locking it behind her, her eyes scanning the dimly lit room.
You're lucky I got here first. They're tearing the city apart looking for you.
I crossed my arms. Then maybe it's time we start looking for them. Evelyn exhaled sharply.
You don't know what you're asking for, Silas. The Black Veil isn't just some gang, they have power, connections. People disappear without a trace because of them.
I met her gaze. Then let's make sure we're not the next ones. For a long moment, silence stretched between us. Then, reluctantly, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook.
This belonged to Harold. If he took something, the answer's in here.
Langley reached for it, but I caught his wrist. Careful. If this book is what they want, touching it might be signing our own death warrants. Evelyn nodded.
Then we better move fast. Because I promise you, they're already coming.
Evelyn placed the leather-bound notebook on the table between us. It looked old, its edges worn from use. The weight of its presence filled the room, as if it carried something more than just words. Langley swallowed hard. So what's in it? Evelyn hesitated.
I don't know. I never dared to open it. But if Harold was willing to risk his life for it, then whatever's inside is worth killing for.
I flipped open the cover. The first few pages were filled with cryptic notes, dates, and locations. Some were crossed out, others underlined heavily. But it was the symbol on the third page that made my breath hitch. A black sigil, crudely drawn in ink. One I had seen before, in places where men whispered of things better left forgotten. Langley leaned in. What the hell is that? I closed the notebook, my pulse quickening. It's a mark. The black veil uses it to signify debts that can't be repaid. Evelyn tensed.
Then Harold wasn't just in trouble. He was owned.
A cold silence settled over the room. The implications were clear. Harold had taken something from the wrong people, and now those people were coming to collect. A sharp noise outside snapped us back to reality. A car engine idled just beyond the alley, its headlights slicing through the boarded-up windows. Then came the soft click of a gun being cocked. I pushed the notebook into my coat pocket and grabbed Langley by the arm. Time's up. We need to move. Evelyn pulled a revolver from her purse.
I'll cover you. There's a back exit through the storage room.
Langley hesitated, panic flashing across his face. But what if they find us? I tightened my grip on my gun. Then we make sure they don't live long enough to regret it. With that, we bolted for the back door. The city wasn't safe anymore. Not for us. Not for anyone tangled in this mess. But there was no turning back now. The secrets Harold left behind had already started unraveling, and the only way out was through the darkness ahead. The night swallowed us whole as we slipped out the back door, Evelyn leading the way through a maze of alleys. The rain had started, a fine mist clinging to my coat, mixing with the smoke curling from my cigarette. I didn't mind. It kept my head clear. Langley stumbled on the slick pavement, his breath ragged. Where are we going? Evelyn didn't break stride.
Somewhere safer than here.
I glanced back. The darkened alley behind us yawned wide, shadows shifting unnaturally, like something unseen was moving in them. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I knew fear had a way of making men see things that weren't there. Still, I kept my gun close. We ducked into an abandoned warehouse, the air thick with the scent of rust and old oil. Evelyn turned, closing the door behind us.
We don't have much time. The Black Veil will send someone worse than the men we just ran from.
Langley sat on a crate, running a hand through his damp hair. Worse? What the hell does that mean? I exhaled smoke. It means they won't just be looking to scare us anymore. Evelyn's face darkened.
They have a man. A fixer. They call him the Unseen Hand. If he's been sent after us, then we have bigger problems than we thought.
The name was familiar, and not in a way I liked. Whispers in the underworld told stories about him. A man no one saw coming, who left no evidence behind. A ghost in the city's underbelly. Langley paled. What do we do? I pulled Harold's notebook from my coat and opened it to the marked pages. We figure out what your brother took and why it's worth killing over. If we know what they want, we might have a chance. Evelyn sat beside me, her finger tracing the black sigil on the page.
This symbol. I've seen it before. Not just with the Black Veil. It's older than them. Much older.
I looked up. What are you saying? She hesitated, then whispered.
Your brother wasn't just dealing with criminals, Silas. He was dealing with something else.
A sharp knock at the warehouse door sent a jolt through all of us. 3 slow taps, then silence. Langley's voice was barely above a whisper. They found us. I checked my gun, my grip tightening around the handle. Then let's make sure they regret it. The next few seconds stretched out like eternity. Another knock, this time softer, more deliberate. Then the doorknob turned. The moment the doorknob twisted, I raised my gun, my fingers steady on the trigger. Evelyn's breath hitched beside me, and Langley shrank back, his face pale. The door creaked open an inch, then stopped. A voice, smooth as velvet, slipped through the crack.
Mr. Riddle, I believe you have something that does not belong to you.
I exchanged a glance with Evelyn. The unseen hand. He had found us. I stepped forward, keeping my gun level. "You've got the wrong guy." The voice chuckled, low and deliberate.
Come now. We both know that isn't true.
The door opened wider, revealing a figure wrapped in shadows, his face hidden beneath the brim of a fedora. Even in the dim light, I could see the cold gleam of his eyes. He wasn't here to negotiate. Evelyn tensed.
We need to move.
She whispered. I weighed my options. If we ran, he'd follow. If we fought, we'd lose. There was only one play left. I lowered my gun just slightly. "What do you want?" The unseen hand stepped forward, the faint scent of tobacco trailing him.
The notebook, Mr. Riddle. Hand it over, and I'll make this easy.
Langley gripped my arm, his voice tight with fear. "Silas, don't." I met the stranger's gaze. Easy for who? His smile didn't reach his eyes.
For everyone still breathing.
My grip tightened around the notebook in my coat pocket. There was no way in hell I was handing it over without answers. I took a slow breath. "I don't suppose you're the kind to offer a deal?" The unseen hand chuckled again.
I just did.
Evelyn's fingers twitched near her purse, where I knew she kept a hidden revolver. I had to decide fast. Play along, or make a move. The air in the warehouse felt thick, pressing in like a noose tightening around our necks. One wrong word, and this night would end in blood. The silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of unspoken threats. My fingers twitched, every muscle coiled like a spring, waiting for the inevitable break. The unseen hand watched me, his expression unreadable, but the quiet calculation in his eyes told me he already knew my answer. I took a slow breath and moved, but not in the way he expected. My free hand shot up, knocking over the rusted oil lamp on the nearby crate. The warehouse plunged into darkness, and in the same instant, Evelyn fired. A single shot rang out, cutting through the heavy air. Langley cursed, scrambling backward. I didn't wait to see if it had landed. I grabbed Evelyn's wrist and yanked her toward the exit. "Move!" Footsteps thundered behind us. Another shot cracked through the air, splintering the wooden crates as we ducked behind them. The unseen hand's voice was calm, steady, too controlled for a man who had just been shot at.
That was foolish, Riddle.
We crashed through the back door into the night. The cold slapped me in the face, sharp and unforgiving. The alley was empty, the streets eerily silent except for the distant hum of neon signs and the echo of our breaths. Evelyn's grip on my arm was iron tight.
Where now?
I glanced back at the warehouse. Shadows moved behind the broken window panes. We didn't have much time. Langley was still gasping, wide-eyed with panic. Did you hit him?" Evelyn shook her head.
No. But I doubt that was the point.
She was right. The unseen hand wasn't just a man, he was a message. A force of nature sent to collect debts, and we had just made ourselves his newest account. I pulled the notebook from my coat, flipping it open to the marked page. Harold knew something. Whatever it was, it scared the Black Veil enough to send their best after him. And now us. Evelyn set her jaw.
Then we stop running. We find them first.
Langley looked between us like a man, realizing he had just stepped off a ledge. "Are you both insane? They'll kill us." I met his panicked gaze. "Then let's make sure we go down with answers." The distant screech of tires sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. I shoved the notebook back into my coat and grabbed Langley by the arm. "We need a lead, and I know just the guy who can give us one." Evelyn arched a brow.
Who?
I exhaled, my breath curling in the cold. "An old friend, one who knows how to dig up secrets even the Black Veil wants buried." Without another word, we disappeared into the night. leaving the echo of our defiance behind us. We moved fast, cutting through the back streets like rats scurrying away from a hungry cat. The city was quiet, too quiet. I didn't like it. Evelyn kept pace beside me, her revolver still clutched in her hand, knuckles white. Langley lagged behind, panting hard. Who is this friend of yours?" he wheezed. I turned down a dark alley, stopping at a heavy metal door covered in old flyers and city grime. I rapped twice, waited, then knocked once more. The sequence wasn't random. It was a code. The slot in the door slid open, revealing a pair of sharp blue eyes that narrowed as they recognized me.
"Hell, Riddle. Last time I saw you, you were bleeding out in a gutter."
Smirked. "And you were the one who patched me up, Danny. Let us in." The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit back room filled with cigarette smoke and the faint hum of a radio playing a slow jazz tune. Danny, the weasel, Porter wasn't just an old friend. He was the guy who knew everything about everyone in this city. If someone sneezed in the Black Veil, Danny probably had the name of the guy who handed them the tissue. He waved us in and shut the door behind us.
"Who's the stiff?"
He nodded toward Langley, who still looked like he might pass out. "A client," I said, "and a man who's got the Black Veil breathing down his neck. We need information." Danny leaned against his desk, picking up a glass of whiskey.
"Oh, and what kind of information would that be?"
I pulled Harold's notebook from my coat and tossed it onto the desk. "Tell me what you know about this." Danny flipped through the pages, his expression turning grim. He lingered on the black sigil before closing the book with a snap.
"You idiots don't know what you've gotten yourselves into."
Evelyn crossed her arms.
Then enlighten us.
Danny took a slow sip of his drink, then exhaled.
"That sigil, it's not just a mark of debt. It's a contract."
Langley paled. "Contract." Danny nodded.
"The Black Veil doesn't just deal in money and favors. They deal in blood. And once you're marked, the only way out is through death. Harold didn't just steal from them, he broke the contract."
A heavy silence filled the room. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling through my teeth. Then what the hell did he take? Danny's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile.
"Not what? Who?"
My stomach dropped. "Who?" Danny leaned forward, lowering his voice.
"Harold Langley took someone the Black Veil wanted. And if he's still alive, he's as good as dead."
Langley swayed on his feet, gripping the desk for support. "My brother wouldn't." Danny raised a brow.
"Are you sure? Because the way I see it, you've got two choices. Find Harold before they do, or start digging his grave."
I clenched my jaw. "Where do we start?" Danny sighed, rubbing his temple.
"If Harold's hiding, he'll be in the one place even the Black Veil fears to tread."
Evelyn's eyes darkened.
You don't mean.
Danny nodded.
"Yeah, the Catacombs."
The room fell into silence. Even Langley seemed to understand the weight of that name. I holstered my gun. "Then that's where we go." Danny shook his head, pouring himself another drink.
"You're signing your own death warrants, Riddle."
I picked up Harold's notebook and slipped it back into my coat. "Then let's make sure we take some of them down with us." Without another word, I turned toward the door, Evelyn and Langley close behind. The night outside was cold, but the weight of my gut told me it was about to get a hell of a lot colder. We were going underground, and if the legends were true, we might never come back. The catacombs weren't on any map. They weren't part of any official record, and most people in the city didn't even know they existed. But those who did knew one thing. If you went down there, you might never come back. Let's take a break. Now you can like this video and subscribe. Well, let's go. Danny had given us the location, a boarded-up warehouse near the old rail yard. No signs, no markers, just a forgotten relic of a city that had long since moved on. The entrance was hidden beneath a rusted metal grate, half buried under layers of dirt and grime. Langley hesitated as Evelyn and I pried the grate open. "This is insane," he muttered. "My brother wouldn't come here." I gave him a hard look. Then Wise's name in a book filled with death contracts. Langley had no answer. We climbed down one by one, our boots echoing against cold stone steps. The deeper we went, the thicker the air became, stale, damp, filled with the weight of time. The walls were lined with bricks older than the city itself, worn smooth by years of unseen hands passing through the darkness. Evelyn drew her revolver.
We shouldn't be here.
She was right. Every instinct in my body told me we were stepping into something we didn't understand. But that had never stopped me before. We reached the bottom, a tunnel stretching out in front of us, disappearing into blackness. Langley pulled a flashlight from his coat, flicking it on. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating faded symbols carved into the walls. Some I recognized, others I wished I didn't. Evelyn's breath hitched.
This isn't just an escape route, Silas. It's something else.
Before I could respond, a sound echoed through the tunnels. A soft shuffle, a whisper, then a voice low, ragged, barely more than a breath. Help me. Langley swung the flashlight wildly. Harold! The light landed on a figure slumped against the far wall. A man, his face gaunt, his clothes torn, his eyes wild with fear. His lips moved, but his voice was gone. It was Harold Langley. Langley bolted forward, dropping to his knees. Harold, what happened to you? Who did this? Harold's eyes flicked to him, then to me. Then, with the last strength he had left, he forced out a single word. Run. The shadows behind him shifted. Then they moved. The air in the tunnel shifted, thick, cold, pressing in like unseen hands closing around us. The darkness behind Harold churned, the shifting shadows taking form, stretching like something waking from a long slumber. Evelyn grabbed my arm, her voice tight.
We need to go. Now.
Langley didn't move. He clutched Harold's shoulders, shaking him. Harold, we're here. We found you. Harold's eyes darted toward him, filled with something worse than fear. Resignation. His breath came in short, ragged bursts.
You shouldn't have come.
Then the shadows surged forward. I fired. The muzzle flash carved out split-second glimpses of the horror before us. Twisted, shifting figures, faceless yet watching. The bullets ripped through them, but they didn't slow. They didn't bleed. Evelyn grabbed Langley and yanked him backward.
Move.
Harold let out a strangled noise as the darkness wrapped around him, dragging him back. His fingers clawed at the ground, but it was useless. His wide, desperate eyes locked onto mine.
Don't let them take.
Then he was gone, swallowed whole. The tunnel fell, deathly silent. Langley let out a choke sob, stumbling back. No. I hauled him to his feet. We don't have time to mourn. We need to run. Evelyn was already moving. We bolted down the tunnel, the sound of our footfalls swallowed by the thing that slithered behind us. The flashlight swung wildly in Langley's shaking grip, catching glimpses of the carvings along the walls. The symbols weren't warnings. They were seals, and something had broken them. A second tunnel split off to the left. I grabbed Langley and shoved him toward it. There! Move! We crashed through a half-collapsed doorway, breathless, hands shaking. Evelyn slammed the rusted gate behind us and wedged a piece of broken stone into place. Then we waited. The silence stretched. No movement. No whispering. Langley collapsed against the wall, gasping. What the hell was that? I wiped the sweat from my brow. Something we weren't supposed to see. Evelyn's eyes darted between us, her breathing ragged.
That wasn't just the black veil. That was something else. Something worse.
I nodded, pulling out the notebook. The sigil Harold had drawn, the one the black veil marked their contracts with, it wasn't a symbol of power. It was a warning. Langley ran a trembling hand through his hair. If they took him, does that mean he's... I didn't answer. I didn't know. Evelyn straightened, reloading her revolver with shaking hands.
We can't stay here. We need to find a way out before whatever that was decides to come looking.
I agreed, but something gnawed at the back of my mind. Harold hadn't told us to run because he wanted to save himself. He told us to run because we were next. And something deep in those tunnels wanted us to know it wasn't finished yet. The tunnel stretched before us, the darkness thick like ink, swallowing the last remnants of light. We didn't speak, didn't breathe too loudly. Whatever had taken Harold was still down here, watching, waiting. Langley clutched his flashlight, the beam unsteady. We need to get out of here. Evelyn pressed her back against the damp wall, gun raised.
We need to figure out what this place is first.
The carvings along the walls had become more erratic, deeper, like someone had gouged them out in a frenzy. I ran my fingers over one of the symbols, different from the sigil in Harold's notebook, but familiar. My gut twisted. These aren't just warnings, I murmured. They're prayers. Evelyn shot me a sharp look.
Prayers? To what?
I exhaled. To whatever was locked down here. A scraping sound echoed from deeper in the tunnel. A slow, deliberate movement. We all froze. Langley whispered, "Tell me that was the wind." No one answered. I motioned for them to move, keeping low as we crept forward. The air grew colder, thick with something foul. And then we saw it. The end of the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, its ceiling lost to shadows. Stone pillars jutted from the ground, arranged in a perfect circle. At the center stood an altar, and atop it, a body. Langley stifled a gasp. Is that? It wasn't Harold. It wasn't even human. The thing on the altar was twisted, malformed, its limbs stretched unnaturally long, its skin slick and black like oil. Its mouth was sewn shut. Evelyn took a step back.
What the hell is this?
Before I could answer, the torches lining the chamber flickered to life. Not from fire, from something else. Something unseen. A whisper slid through the air, curling around us like smoke. Not a voice, but a presence. The sigils on the walls glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Langley whimpered, "We shouldn't be here." He was right, but it was too late. The whisper grew louder, turning into a chorus of voices, speaking in a language I didn't understand. The body on the altar twitched. Then, slowly, it turned its head toward us. I grabbed Evelyn's arm. "Run!" We ran. The tunnel walls blurred past, the flickering torchlight casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to reach for us. Behind us, the whispering grew louder, morphing into something unnatural, a sound that wasn't just heard but felt, pressing against my skull like an unwelcome thought. Langley tripped, his flashlight clattering against the stone floor. I grabbed his arm, yanking him back to his feet. "Keep moving." Evelyn fired a shot over her shoulder. The echo rang through the tunnel, but whatever was behind us didn't stop. The ground trembled beneath us, a low rumbling that sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Something ancient had woken, and it wasn't happy. A rusted metal door appeared up ahead, half buried in the stone wall. I reached for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. "Help me with this." I barked at Langley. Together, we shoved against the door. It groaned, the hinges resisting years of rust and neglect. The whispering behind us grew into a roar, voices overlapping in a language I didn't understand, but somehow, deep in my gut, I knew they were calling our names. The door gave way. We tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us. The moment it clicked into place, the roaring stopped. Silence. Heavy, absolute. Langley collapsed against the wall, gasping. Evelyn reloaded her revolver with shaking hands.
What the hell was that?
I pressed my ear against the door, listening. Nothing, but I could still feel it. That presence, that weight in the air, pressing down on us like something massive, just beyond sight. I turned to take in a room we'd stumbled into. It wasn't another tunnel. It was a chamber, lined with towering bookshelves, each stacked high with crumbling tomes. The air smelled of old paper and damp stone. Evelyn wiped sweat from her brow.
A library?
not just a library, an archive, a place where knowledge was hidden, not shared. The Black Veil's secrets, maybe even the truth about what Harold had found. Langley stepped forward, his fingers grazing the spine of a leather-bound book. This place, it's been abandoned for a long time. I pulled Harold's notebook from my coat, flipping to the marked pages. The symbols, the sigils, they were here. Not just in ink, but carved into the very stone of the walls. Evelyn met my gaze.
Harold wasn't running from the Black Veil.
I nodded. He was running from whatever they were trying to keep locked down here. Langley swallowed hard. Then why are we still here? Because the only way out was forward. And whatever was waiting for us in the depths of this place wasn't done with us yet. I stepped toward one of the shelves, running my fingers along the spines of books, so old the leather crumbled at my touch. The Black Veil had hidden something here, something they had feared enough to bury beneath the city. If Harold had uncovered it, then we were already in deeper than we could claw our way out of. Evelyn flipped open a tome, scanning its brittle pages.
This isn't just a library, Silas. This is a record. Names, dates, contracts.
Langley's hands shook as he picked up a smaller book, its cover marked with a sigil identical to the one in Harold's notebook. He opened it, eyes scanning the entries. Then he froze. His name's here, Harold Langley. I took the book from him and traced my finger down the list. Harold's name was there, written in thick ink, but beside it was something worse. A second name, one crossed out so violently the page had nearly torn. Evelyn leaned in.
That's not a name. It's a warning.
A shuffling sound came from deeper in the archive. A slow, deliberate movement. Langley swallowed hard. We're not alone. I nodded. We never were. A gust of air rushed past us, and the torches flickered. The whispering returned, weaving through the shelves like something alive. I pulled my revolver, my instincts screaming that we had just passed the point of no return. From the shadows, a voice rasped.
You shouldn't have come.
Langley stumbled back, nearly knocking over a stack of books. Evelyn grabbed his arm to steady him, her eyes darting toward the darkness ahead. Who's there? The voice chuckled. Dry. Hollow.
You already know.
Then a figure stepped forward, and my blood ran cold. It was Harold, or what was left of him. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out by something far worse than exhaustion. The ink of the sigil from his notebook was burned into the flesh of his forearm, the mark twisting as if it were alive. His lips parted, voice barely a whisper.
I tried to stop them. I tried.
Langley lunged forward, but I yanked him back. That's not your brother anymore. Harold's head twitched to the side, his eyes locking onto mine.
You have to burn it, Riddle, before they take you too.
The ground beneath us trembled. Evelyn grabbed my wrist.
What do we do?
I clenched my jaw. We finish what Harold started. We end this. The archive walls groaned, the darkness thickening like something about to burst free. Whatever the Black Veil had hidden here was waking up, and we were running out of time. The walls of the archive groaned, the sigils pulsing like a heartbeat beneath layers of dust and decay. The ground trembled beneath us, a low hum growing into a deafening roar. Whatever Harold had feared, whatever the Black Veil had sealed away, it was coming. Langley grabbed my arm. We have to get out of here. Evelyn was already moving, yanking one of the books from the shelf and flipping through its brittle pages.
Harold said to burn it. What exactly are we supposed to burn? The whole damn place?
Harold, or what was left of him, took a shuddering step forward. His body was failing, breaking apart from whatever unholy bargain had been forced upon him. The ledger, he rasped, barely audible over the growing cacophony around us.
It binds them. Destroy it.
My gaze snapped back to the book Langley had found, the one with Harold's name, the one with the other name slashed through. I grabbed it and turned to the nearest shelf, scanning the rows. The ledgers weren't just records. They were contracts. Pacts. Evelyn's voice cut through the noise.
Silas. She had pulled another book free, its spine identical to the one I held. More names. More sigils. More souls.
Langley backed away from the trembling shelves. We don't have time for this. He was right. The whispering turned to screams. Shadows slithered from the crevices between the shelves, stretching toward us like skeletal fingers. If we hesitated, we wouldn't leave this place alive. I ripped a match from my pocket and struck it against a rough stone wall. If this works, we run. Evelyn nodded, holding the book steady. The flames licked at the brittle pages before catching, devouring the ink, the paper, the cursed words scrawled in blood and secrecy. The glow spread rapidly, leaping from one ledger to the next. A scream erupted, not from the shadows, but from the very walls of the archive. The sigils burned, their power unraveling in tendrils of black smoke. The shadows recoiled, writhing as if in agony. Harold fell to his knees, his hollow gaze fixed on the flames. A single tear traced down his withered cheek. He whispered. Then he collapsed, and the mark on his skin faded into nothing. The floor beneath us cracked. We had seconds. Go! I barked, grabbing Langley and shoving him toward the exit. Evelyn sprinted ahead, her coat whipping behind her. The fire spread, consuming everything in its path. We stumbled through the collapsing tunnel, the air thick with smoke and the dying echoes of something that had long overstayed its welcome in this world. The entrance loomed ahead, moonlight spilling through the open grate. We threw ourselves out, landing hard in the damp grass just as the ground behind us gave way. The archive was gone. The darkness was gone. We lay there, panting, watching the embers flicker in the night air. Evelyn rolled onto her back, staring at the sky.
Tell me we're done?
Langley sat up, wiping soot from his face. Harold, he's really gone, isn't he? I nodded, feeling the weight settle in my chest. Yeah, but so is whatever had its claws in him. Silence fell between us. The city still stood, unchanged, oblivious to what had happened beneath its streets. But we knew. We would always know. Evelyn exhaled and sat up, brushing off her coat.
So, Riddle, what now?
I reached into my pocket and pulled out a cigarette, lighting it with the last match from my book. Now we drink. And for the first time in a long while, the night didn't feel quite so dark. A week had passed. The city still moved, unaware of what had almost clawed its way to the surface. The Velvet Viper was still open, the streets still whispered with secrets, and I was still sitting at my desk, the weight of the case settling deep into my bones. A knock at my office door. I didn't need to look up. Come in. Evelyn stepped inside, a newspaper tucked under her arm.
Figured you'd want to see this.
She dropped it on my desk. The headline read, "Warehouse fire near rail yard. No survivors." No mention of the archive. No mention of Harold. The black veil had covered its tracks. I exhaled, folding the paper. It's never really over, is it? Evelyn smirked.
Not in this town.
And outside, the shadows stretched long, waiting. A gust of wind rattled the office window. I reached for my cigarette case, flipping it open with a click. Evelyn pulled up a chair, draping one leg over the other as she watched me. Then, another knock at the door. Heavy, measured, deliberate. We exchanged a glance. Something in the air shifted, thick and cold, pressing in around us like a whisper we couldn't quite hear. The city outside was never truly silent, but now, for the first time in a long while, it was. The doorknob twisted. Evelyn's breath hitched. My fingers curled around the cigarette case, but I no longer needed the smoke. Some doors, once opened, never close again. Thank you all for watching. What do you think of the mysterious guest who came to Riddle? Write your thoughts in the comments. And I'll say goodbye to you until the next video.